Drafting successfully in the NHL is part science, part wizardry, and a whole lot of patience. On today's Locked On Predators podcast, we're going to take a look back at Nashville's 2019 draft class and talk about how a few of those players could impact the team next season.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast, and thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this episode with a shout out to our Locked On Pred heads. Those are our everyday listeners who tune in to talk Nashville Predators hockey with us. We appreciate your support, and we love that we get to spend a little bit of your day with you. I'm Ann Kimmel. I am a writer with Penalty Box Radio, and my friends, I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I am the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
On today's show, Emma and I are going to take a look back. You know, we've spent a lot of time this offseason looking ahead. They've got some great, free agent additions. But how could some of the homegrown players from the 2019 draft class impact next season? We're going to look at that draft class and discuss how some of those players may or may not be able to help the team moving forward. Before we dive into all that, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sportsin' like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Emma, before we kick off this draft class discussion, I do want to tell everyone watching on YouTube, do not adjust your screen. Emma really is that tan. that is not your screen. Emma really is that tan.
That's the best compliment you can give me, because I will be honest, it may have been a mild burn that turned into a tan, but it was a weekend at the beach well spent if I come back glowing. So I'm glad it's noticeable even through the computer screen.
It is. I feel extra pasty white. I spent the weekend in Pennsylvania where I was not at the beach. So here I am, still glowing in a different way.
Yes, you're always glowing, Ann.
Yeah, something like that. That's sweat, Emma. That's middle-aged sweat.
I had a ballet teacher when I was younger who said ladies don't sweat, they glisten. So that's what I go with.
There we go.
Glistening.
We are glistening. We are delightful glisteners, y'all.
Yes.
Okay, here's who doesn't glisten. Hockey players, y'all. They straight sweat.
Oh, yeah. No,
I'm going to be honest with you.
Yep.
And we're going to talk about a specific group of hockey players. We're looking back at the 2019 Nashville Predators draft class. And you think 2019 in some ways it seems just like yesterday. In a lot of ways, it seems like a long time ago, pandemic in there and all that stuff. But because of the way the NHL draft goes and the age of these players when they're drafted and then when they're really ready for the NHL, these are still players that we're waiting to kind of gauge perspective on and contributions on. So Emma, just want to step back. You've been to, several drafts. You've covered drafts all the time. What is it that makes it so challenging when the NHL, when a team is looking to draft? It seems so much more difficult than the NFL to guarantee success.
I think I think the biggest difference lies there, which is that in the NFL, you're drafting guys that you want to make an impact on your team this year. And you're going to see those guys this year. In the NHL, aside from the few exceptions like Connor Bedard, Macklin Celebrini, who are, again, the exceptions and not the rule, you're trying to see the future and you're trying to pick guys who are going to impact your team in 3 to 5 years, like depending on how old they are when you draft them and where they're at in their kind of development trajectory. And I think for a team like the Predators, who, for the last several years have been a playoff team, they're not usually drafting near the top of the order. They're usually in the bottom half. And so it becomes even more challenging because you really are not you're not getting Connor Bedard down there. Right. So then you're like, all right, well, now we have to predict the future and we have to see which players are going to, first of all, we have to project how these individual players are going to develop and what are they going to look like. Because a lot of these kids, to be honest, they're 17 years old. They are
kids.
And
they are kids. Yes.
You have to, there's so much physical development that happens there, not to mention mental and everything else, just maturation. So I think that that's part of it. But then the other part of it is you have to look at the team and what the organizational needs are, because
let's go.
What your organization may be totally set in one area right now. It may be like, hey, we are so set up on defense, we don't need any more defensemen right now. In 5 years, is that going to be the case? You have to kind of project that way. And then you look at maybe guys who, maybe younger players who are on the NHL roster now who could still be making an impact in 5 years. And it's like, okay, well, how would this prospect play paired up with this current NHL player in 5 years? Would that be a good match? And how do their skill sets balance each other out? So it's just so much. I mean, to me, as someone with high functioning anxiety, it really, it stresses me out because
yes.
I hate to be wrong. I hate to guess and then be wrong. And then, I just, to me, it's too much unknown. I'm not a gambler, in case that wasn't clear. And a lot of drafting and scouting is a gamble. It's not a completely uninformed gamble. Obviously, you're doing a lot of work and research to make educated guesses about things, but sometimes you got to take the L on some of them. They just don't pan out. On the flip side of that coin is some of them pan out better than you ever could have expected. So it's just, it's a lot of unknown for me, gives me a lot of anxiety, but
it is not a job I would ever want. I am with you. And of course, like you say, the hours, months that the scouts put in doing research and analyzing everything. And I understand that. But like you say, a lot also depends on where the team is. And if you look back at this, 2019 team, they were drafted, with Peter Laviolette as the head coach and the team playing a very specific style of hockey. This team now is playing under Andrew Brunette, and it is a very different style of hockey. And so the players that you drafted in 2019 for a specific skill set, does that match up with the direction the team is going right now? And so there is a lot that changes in those, in these last 5 years for this 2019 draft class. A lot has changed. And, you mentioned the players themselves change, but the game changes, the team changes, and the needs of the team change. And so when I look at drafting, the draft is so exciting, and I agree with you. I find it high stress, not a gig I would want, but you really put so much emphasis on the draft. But what really matters is development. That's the piece that you really have to have all your eggs in that basket. Who you draft is one thing, and you want to be educated about that, but you have to be sure of your development process for these players. And I think that's something that Nashville has been very fortunate with, their development process, their coaching staff, all of that kind of stuff. But it is not an easy gig. I will say, looking at this 2019 draft class, this is 5 years ago, 8 picks. This is a really interesting draft class to talk about. And that's what we're going to do today. Let's just real quick talk through our 8 picks, and then we're going to dive in and talk about a couple of these specifically and where they're at with this team and where they could be. First round pick in 2019, my friends, not at all controversial these days, Phil Tomasino. Yep. Second round pick, Igor Afanasyev. Yep. Feel like there's been some news on that one recently.
Just 2 really vanilla picks there. Just very not much to talk about there.
No, there's no stories at all.
No. All right. Yep. What else you got?
Third round, forward Alexander Campbell. That's maybe not a name people are very familiar with, but that is somebody that the Preds fans need to be watching. Fourth round, welcome to Locked On Marc Del Gaizo, your 5-day-a-week podcast about everything defenseman Marc Del Gaizo. Also in the fourth round, Semyon Krishchikov, defenseman. Fifth round, goaltender Ethan Hayter. The goalies, they just always, it's like a kicker in the NFL, just always down. Yeah. Isaac Walther, forward in the sixth round. And the seventh round pick in the 2019 draft that I feel like we're going to have to talk about, Juuso Pärssinen. So this is a really fascinating 2019 draft class. This is a class that could have pretty significant impact on what the Nashville Predators do in the future. But there are also some storylines there that we need to be talking about as well. We're going to do that coming up in just a minute. First, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. We all are loving sports. We love them so much, we never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have wound down, we're getting fewer and fewer games. And the sports, they are not sportsin' like we want them to. But FanDuel lets you keep the sports going whenever you want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And friends, preseason football is kicking off, but that doesn't mean you have to wait to bet with FanDuel. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There is something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Emma, I feel like we have to start with the first round pick, not just because he was the first round pick, but because this is such a storyline for the Nashville Predators. And this is a player that 5 years later, I don't know that we can say with any certainty is going to be a great addition or is going to be a bust for the Nashville Predators. And friends, that is Phil Tomasino. I don't even know what to do with this. When he was drafted, Emma, I went back and read some of his draft previews and just some interviews about him when it comes to the draft. And the one thing everybody talked about was how he drives play with speed. And I thought, can you think of a better description of somebody that would flourish under Andrew Brunette? That has maybe not been the experience in this first year under Andrew Brunette. So when you look at Phil Tomasino, do you think this is a player that has a future with Nashville, or do you think this is going to be a first-round draft pick that we may look back 5 years from now and say, man, that was a bust?
I don't know.
Is that not so strange? It's so strange.
I don't know. And I think, talking about if a player ends up being a bust or whatever, if first round pick
term.
I know, because it's like, to me, I look at the one, in this conversation, what would be a bust? I tend to look at it like I look at relationships, like each one is a lesson. Each one, you learn something from it. You learn things about yourself. In this case, we're not talking about me right now. You learn things about the player, you learn things about the team and what the team needs, maybe what you thought the team needed versus what they actually need. And you wouldn't know if you didn't try. And I think that every piece, like every draft pick, it helps you in some way. Like it'll help you learn what you do or don't need, or what does or doesn't fit the system. And I think that, again, going back to what I said earlier in the show, which is that so much of scouting is just guesswork. And,
right.
You can try to project, like you said, drives play with speed. Oh, Andrew Brunette. Hello. Like it makes perfect sense. But how that looks on paper versus how it looks on the ice is, can sometimes be very different. And again, like Barry Trotz likes to say, you don't play the game on paper. So sometimes it just, you would think it would make perfect sense and it doesn't. So I think if Tomasino does end up being a quote unquote bust, I think that first of all, you can't look at him that way entirely because he had a fantastic rookie season with Nashville. He was a big contributor for that team. It was 21, 22, I think. And I think that season and his performance that season is what raised the expectations for him to be so much higher. And he's just kind of fallen flat with that since then. And again, there could be a lot of reasons for it. Andrew Brunette's comments after he got sent down this most recent time seemed a little pointed, maybe a little like maybe it was not an attitude problem, but maybe kind of a work ethic thing. And
embrace the suck.
Yes. And so I think that, again, those are those intangibles that you don't really know. You can't really quantify them on paper until you see them and you see how they play out. And so I think that, it's, again, like relationships, certain people are good for you at certain times in your life. Like they can be right for you at that time, but it doesn't mean that they are your person forever. So again, I'm not saying this with any certainty because I really don't know yet, but it's very possible that Phil Tomasino could fall into that category for the Predators, where he was really good for them when they needed him in 21-22. But, things change, you evolve, you grow, you go your separate ways sometimes. So I just, my gut tells me that, with the coaching change, the system change, everything else, I never like to speak in absolutes. I never like to say, it's impossible that he'll never recover from this and he'll never, get to his full potential with the Predators. But I will say, I do think it's going to be extremely difficult for him to ever have a truly clean slate with the Predators and actually be able to show what he's capable of. I just think with everything it's almost like too much damage has been done. And I don't mean damage like he's damaged his reputation, but like it just, he has a certain identity within this organization. And I think the only way for him to truly have a fresh start is to have that fresh start with another team.
And I think that is what makes Phil Tomasino so tricky as we look at who he was when they drafted him and where he's at now with the organization and moving forward, because you can't say that he doesn't have enough talent to play at the NHL level, because we've seen that he does. He does have the talent to play at the NHL level. Now, is the system not the right fit? Is there a disconnect among communication or understanding what they want? It's very hard to say. And that's one of those things that they don't peel the curtain back on very far for us in the media. And, okay. But this is such a tricky one because I agree with you. You can look at some of these draftees and say, you know what, they had a ton of potential, but the leap to the NHL is just a step too far beyond their abilities. I don't think that's true with Phil Tomasino. And yet, we haven't seen him find his place with the Nashville Predators. And I am with you. There comes a point in time where you think, it feels to me like this training camp, this is sort of a prove it training camp, but on steroids in a lot of ways, because you have to remember, this is a player who didn't find a fit under two different head coaches, two different systems. And so what does he offer this team moving forward? It's very hard to say. And I agree with you. And I don't know which is more difficult to take as a fan base, drafting a player and realizing, you know what, he just can't make the leap to the NHL level, which is disappointing, or drafting a player, not finding a way for him to make a spot on your roster, and then going to another team and finding his spot in the NHL. Like, it's that Ellie Tolvanen syndrome all over again. And I think that there is a potential for Phil Tomasino to be the next Ellie Tolvanen syndrome, for Nashville Predators fans. And that's tough. But again, that's part of the business.
It is. And I think another important thing to point out, we've talked about, not being a fit under different coaches, different systems, what have you. I think another really important thing here is now the organizational timeline has shifted so drastically and the goals
True.
have shifted so drastically. Whereas before, last year, the year before, it was easy to be like, all right, well, Tomasino isn't quite what he was his rookie season, sophomore slump, whatever you want to call it. We have the luxury of time to be patient with him as he figures this out. Now, as we've talked about at length, the organization is in win now mode, which is not a place that they've been in for quite a few years. And so now it's like, all right, yes, we prioritize the development of our players, but it's not going to come at the cost of, our organizational success. So I think that's another thing to take into account, not just with Tomasino, really with a lot of players on this roster that, because the organization's goals have changed. Not that the goals have changed, because the goal is always to win a Stanley Cup, but the timeline for achieving that goal has changed. And so you want to be able to meet players where they're at, and sometimes you're in a better position to do that than others. And I think that is something that maybe we haven't talked about enough, which is that with this, we could see some really difficult decisions getting made with this team now, because if a player's trajectory or a player's development does not match up with where the organization is, in their timeline, you gotta make some tough calls.
Yeah. One of the players from the 2019 draft class that may be affected by that change in timeline is Juuso Pärssinen. We're going to talk about him coming up. Rookie and training camp is going to be kicking off next month. And if you are looking for more Nashville Predators talk beyond the podcast, Emma and I want to invite you to join our Locked On Predators Insider program via subtext. It's a chance for Emma and I to update our insiders in real time on breaking news. We're going to be sending out practice updates, in-game analysis, and just sparking hockey conversation. We also love fielding questions and discussing a variety of Preds topics with our insiders. To find out information on becoming a Locked On Predators insider, click the link on the video description or check out the details in our show's bio. All right, Emma, we've talked about timeline. We've talked about players who maybe the grace period changes because of where Nashville is at in 2024-25. And one of those players from the 2019 draft class is Juuso Pärssinen. Now, this is a 7th round pick. Part of his appeal, I think, to everybody is it's that like hidden gem that you found. Now, here's the thing. Juuso Pärssinen, very talented player. And I think a lot of people, even pre-draft, knew how talented he was. I think partly his stock fell because he suffered kind of a major injury, and that kind of tends to make teams shy away. But Juuso Pärssinen is very similar in some ways to Phil Tomasino for me, in the sense that you have seen flashes of NHL ability, but not consistency. And here's the trouble, I think, for Juuso Pärssinen, and this is a great problem to have, is that he came out of the gate and impressed people with a couple of plays that stick in people's mind, like his first goal, just this massive, move past Lafreniere to score his first goal. And then, of course, we have what will probably be one of my favorite hockey plays ever, and that was an overtime goal against Minnesota, where he scores between the legs and then just shrugs his shoulders like, anybody can do that. No, everybody cannot do that. So you see these like really high level flashes of NHL ability from Juuso Pärssinen, and that sets an expectation. And then you have this amazing like 7th round draft pick, diamond in the rough kind of storyline. But it hasn't been as smooth of sailing for Juuso Pärssinen. And with the team saying, we're going for it now, this is going to be a season where Pärssinen is going to have to be consistent and going to have it all together if he wants to make this roster out of training camp.
I agree with you. I will say though that yes, we like to all kind of fixate on the between the legs, the shoulder shrug, the flashy plays, but Juuso Pärssinen is not just flash. Like there's a
Mhm.
lot of substance to him, and I think that, I mean, it's no secret I am a big Juuso Pärssinen fan, and I not that I'm not a Phil Tomasino fan, but I just, when I look at roster construction, I think of, not only what roles can they fill, like what roles can a player fill on a roster, but also can they fill more than one role? Like how versatile are they? And I feel like Pärssinen can be more valuable to this roster. Now, I'm saying he can be. Will he be? Different question. And that goes back to what you're saying about training camp being a prove it time for both of them. But if we're just looking at pure potential ceiling, I think
Mhm.
that, I don't know. I mean, technically, I guess it depends on how you want to define ceiling, but I think that, a lot of the kind of prevailing thought is that Tomasino has the higher ceiling offensively, because of that speed and that, top six potential that he has. Um, but we just haven't really seen it. Not enough, I don't think. And
Right.
then with Pärssinen, I just think, yes, he makes the flashy plays and that's great, but there's so much more to his game. I mean, he's a big body, he's
So
physical.
strong. My gosh, is he strong?
He's so hard to move off of pucks.
Mhm.
Now, like, yes, in theory, Tomasino's speed should offset that, but I don't think it does, at
Mhm.
least not for me. If I'm watching both of those guys, I'm going to take the guy that's harder to move off the puck and is the bigger body, is really defensively responsible. I just think that Pärssinen, he can play center and the wing. I just think that he can fill a more, kind of robust role for what this team is looking for. And I think he's a grinder. He works really, really hard. And yes, he's also had some consistency issues. I think injury played a big part of that. I mean, he was injured for most of training camp last season and then kind of came in and, Andrew Brunette had him on that top line with
Right.
Ryan O'Reilly and Philip Forsberg for a while, and he looked good. Like that, it
Mhm.
wasn't like he looked like a fish out of water. It looked good. So I think that, to me, I'm more confident throwing Pärssinen out there than Tomasino if I can only pick one. But again, there are a lot of caveats, a lot of asterisks, a lot of, like he has the potential, but will he, and
Right.
that's what we'll have to see.
The spot that I think of when I think of these two players and this next roster or this next season's roster is I think about the giant hole that Kiefer Sherwood leaves on that fourth line that was so important to Nashville. And on the one hand, you have Phil Tomasino, who has great chemistry with Michael McCarron. They have played together for a while. They have great chemistry. They're hilarious together off the ice. So there's a lot of chemistry there. But when you look at what the role is of that fourth line, it's very much to get the puck, you get a shot on net, you get a goal or you get an offensive zone face off. Like that is their job. We're going to get the puck. I tend to think that while maybe Juuso Pärssinen doesn't have the speed that Tomasino does, I tend to think he may have an edge as far as adding what that identity line's role is going forward. And so I think it's going to be interesting in training camp to see what each of those players brings. And again, there's lots of other places on the roster for these guys to try out, but I really try to say where would they fit? And I look at that fourth line, there may be kind of a battle there for those guys. So I think Pärssinen is another one that, you can say he is an NHL player, not quite there yet. And will the Predators have the patience, or will his time in Milwaukee and his offseason get him to the level where they want him to be on a team that has to be competitive, that is determined to be a deep playoff cup team? I think these are going to be really important storylines for these players. And like I said, they've had 5 years since their draft time, and they're kind of at the green light. Like this is where you got to go. Like you got to go this year. Another player that Emma and I have talked about plenty on the podcast, and we'll continue to talk about plenty from that 2019 draft class, is Marc Del Gaizo. And this is a defenseman. Of course, you think of Nashville, you think of defensemen, you think of, players that they've developed, and that's just something that this organization is known for, or their defensive core. Marc Del Gaizo is an under the radar guy, and I think part of that is he is I always joke and say he's fun size. Like he's not, your giant defender. He's not your Nikita Zadorov. If you were all thinking that they were going to call up a guy who's going to step into that, that's not Marc Del Gaizo's game. But this is another player who, as we've talked about, if the Predators make a subtraction that involves Dante Fabro, could potentially be the next man up in the 2024-25 season. How do you feel about Marc Del Gaizo's game when it comes to next season and where the Predators are going to be?
Again, we know how I feel about Marc Del Gaizo. We are locked on Marc Del Gaizo.
We are locked on Marc Del Gaizo.
But I think I think his work ethic fits Andrew Brunette's system so well. And he is he's small, like you said, but he plays big. And I think that he's another one of those guys who's hard to move off of pucks. My goodness, does he hustle back to defend the play. And I think that he is going to give you everything that you ask of him and more. Again, I think probably just needs a little bit more polish, a little bit more development time. And like you said, we've already seen him be the next man up. We saw him when he got called up last year, and I made him cry.
It was the sweetest thing. And thank you, Marc Del Gaizo, for acknowledging your family like that.
Yeah.
Good egg.
It was the best. But I think that he, it'll be interesting to see because, you have him. You also now have Spencer Stastny, who technically, is on a 2-way deal this year. So he could end up starting in Milwaukee. Then you have Adam Wilsby, who the organization is really high on. We haven't seen him in the NHL yet, but he could be coming. I feel pretty strongly that we will see him at some point in the NHL this year. So, I think that Del Gaizo does a lot of things well. I think that it depends on, you want to be putting him in position to succeed as well. And I think that, we've seen I've talked about this on a previous episode, but his defensive partner in college, his freshman year of college, was a guy named Cale Makar. And
who I've heard is decent.
I've heard he's perfectly fine. So I think that Del Gaizo has the ability to play that kind of offensive style and playmaking. He wasn't always going to be the goal scorer, but that's Makar's job. He sets up the plays. He creates space for Makar to get to the net. Like, I think that if you put him, and listen, I'm not suggesting that, move over Brady Shea. Let's put Marc Del Gaizo with Roman Josi. But I think in theory, if you put him with a more offensive minded defenseman, it's going to put him in a better position to succeed than if you put him with, let's say, Luke Schenn. I just, it's not that one is good or bad or worse or whatever. I just think that it's all about styles of play and what matches up well together.
And I think you are absolutely right about Del Gaizo. I think his secret sauce, yes, he is very sound defensively. He is very hard on pucks. He is very physical. But I do think his secret sauce is that this is a guy who kicks off offense. He may not be the guy that finishes it, but this is a guy who kicks off offense. And don't underestimate that. So I think that the Predators really have something in Marc Del Gaizo. We'll see. This is one of those players where time may be on his side because of where the Predators are defensively. But this is a player from 2019. Definitely keep your eye on. One that is gone real quick, Emma, Igor Afanasyev. Did you think that we would see Igor as more of a regular piece for the Predators? And how surprised are you that he is not only not with the Predators, but he's not in the NHL. He signed a 2-year deal in the KHL. He's going back to Russia.
Yeah, that surprises me a little bit. I will say I'm less surprised that he's not a fixture with the Preds. I could kind of see the writing on the wall with that one a couple years ago, even. But I really would have thought that a move to a team like San Jose would be good for him. That, that he had a much clearer pathway to regular NHL playing time than he did in Nashville. But San Jose also is not, and I don't mean to speculate or speak for him because I don't know, but like San Jose is also not a team that's going to be contending for a cup anytime soon. And so you don't know what his priorities are. And obviously he's from Russia, but he's been in the US for a really long time. Long time. And so homesickness could be part of it. I don't know. Like, I think that there are a lot of factors there. And so it is disappointing. It's disappointing for me selfishly because he was one of my favorites to talk to.
So delightful.
Yes, he was a gem. Not was. I feel like we're eulogizing him. He's still alive.
He's still alive and great and a gem.
He's still a gem in the present. But yeah, I genuinely hope the best for him. Like I said, I don't think Nashville was going to be it regardless. I'm a little surprised that he left the NHL, but I truly hope it works out for him.
Yeah, wishing him all the best. I'm with you. I was surprised. I really felt like San Jose would have given him the opportunity for more minutes, would have given him an opportunity for an elevated role. But I do think that there is something to be said for homesickness. I got to talk to Fedor Svechkov when I went down to cover the Admirals playoff game. First of all, again, a Russian gem. But just in talking with him, he talked about, like, I talk to my mom every day, but these guys don't see their families. And it's not just they don't see their families. They don't hear their native language. The food is different. Things smell different. Like it is such a huge ask. And players do it really well and they do it all the time. But that is a factor, I think, that maybe people look at this strictly professionally and not holistically for these. I do want to mention one other player from the 2019 draft, just real quick, that I am going to be keeping my eye on next season, and that is Alex Campbell. And this is a forward who played in Clarkson for 3 years, joined Northeastern. I think David Poile probably was like, yeah, because isn't he a Northeastern? David Poile, like big Northeastern guy. Yeah. Bless. But Alexander Campbell is going to be playing. He joined Milwaukee for 9 games in the regular season when the NCAA season was over, 4 games in the postseason. But he is going to be back with the Admirals next season. And this is a player I think we need to keep an eye on. First of all, he is not fun size. He is giant size. He's a full-size candy bar on Halloween. But he plays a really interesting game. This is a player I think we want to keep our eye on. So I did want to shout out Alex Campbell, Milwaukee Admirals next season, a player worth watching. And you want to talk about the difference between an 18-year-old when he's drafted and then 5 years later. Look at Alexander Campbell's draft picture and then now, boy to a grown-up. If you ever wonder.
I'm saying, look at Roman Yossi's draft picture. I mean, that's all you need.
I can't. Philip, have you seen Philip Forsberg's?
I have. Unrecognizable.
Who are you?
Yep.
Who are you? And his voice was cracking the whole time he was doing his draft interview. It's just crazy. So the 2019 draft class still has a lot of potential to impact the Nashville Predators going forward. Those are just some of the players we think you need to keep your eye on. So be sure to tune in here at Locked On Predators as we continue to cover what is coming up next season and the players you may see on the roster as well. Before we sign off, Emma, let everyone know where they can find you and they can find your work.
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingen, and you can find my work at the Hockey News.
You can find me at Penalty Box Radio. You can also find me on social media at ANK_Mama on Ice. You can find the podcast at LO_Predators as well. Thank you for making Locked On Predators your first listen today. Now go check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. We will be back with an all new episode later this week. We hope you guys have a great day. We'll see you soon.